Welcome back to News for Today, your weekly deep dive into the geopolitical undercurrents shaping our world. I'm your host, James, and today we are looking at something that, when it first hit the headlines, sounded like a strange joke, but actually exposed serious fault lines in the transatlantic relationship: the bizarre saga of Donald Trump and his quest to acquire Greenland. To walk us through the strategic implications of America's interest in the Arctic, the European reaction, and what it signals for NATO, we are thrilled to welcome back Elena, our expert analyst on European affairs and defense policy. Elena, welcome.
Thanks, James. It's great to be back. And you're right, the phrase "Trump wants to buy Greenland" initially sounds like something out of a satire, but the reality behind the desire is very serious.
Absolutely. Let's start with the context. In 2019, the idea of the U.S. purchasing Greenland, an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, went from rumor to confirmed political strategy. What was the core European reaction to this, especially given the history of U.S. interest in Greenland dating back decades?
The European reaction, particularly from Denmark and Brussels, was one of initial confusion, followed quickly by polite dismissal, and then some underlying frustration. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen famously called the suggestion absurd. But underneath that dismissal lies a critical geopolitical truth. Greenland is strategically priceless. For the U.S., it wasn't just a quirky real estate purchase. It was about solidifying their presence in the Arctic, especially with China and Russia making aggressive moves there.
That's a good point. It shows the difference between a transactional mindset, treating a sovereign territory as an asset to be purchased, and a traditional geopolitical alliance mindset.
Exactly. And that transactional approach is what truly rankled many European leaders. It treated Denmark as a subsidiary entity rather than a core NATO ally. This leads us directly to the perspective of figures like Friedrich Merz in Germany.
Yes, let's talk Merz. He's a heavyweight in German conservative politics and has been vocal about Europe's defense responsibilities. How did this specific Greenland episode factor into his broader critique of Germany's role in NATO?
Merz used the episode as a perfect example of why Europe needs to grow up, geopolitically speaking. His stance, which is slightly more hawkish than Angela Merkel's historically, is that if the U.S. continues to behave in this transactional, unpredictable way, Europe cannot rely solely on the U.S. umbrella. The underlying message was, Europe must become capable of defending itself and its interests, including those in the Arctic, without absolute dependence on Washington.
So, the Greenland affair wasn't just about a potential island sale. It was a catalyst for internal European debate about sovereignty and strategic autonomy.
Precisely. Merz essentially argued that if the U.S. president is focused on buying strategic land in a way that bypasses or even irritates allies, then the traditional bargain of NATO, we pay for defense, you provide security, is fundamentally breaking down. It reinforced the European desire to be taken seriously as a geopolitical partner, not just a security dependent. And we should remember, Merz was vying to succeed Merkel at the time, so these comments were also aimed at showcasing a firmer, more Atlanticist, that strategically autonomous vision for Germany.
That shifts the focus nicely to the military aspect. The U.S. already operates the Thule Air Base in Greenland, a major defensive asset. When we talk about Arctic strategy, what is Greenland's true value in the context of global warming and new maritime routes?
Its value is skyrocketing, James. As the ice melts, new shipping lanes like the Northern Sea Route become navigable for longer periods. Greenland sits right at the choke point of the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean. Control, or at least influence, over Greenland means access to vast, newly accessible resources, rare earth minerals, oil, gas, and critical military positioning to monitor the movement of Russian submarines and potentially Chinese activity. For the U.S., securing Greenland means securing their northern flank and maintaining dominance over the Arctic theater. For Europe, it means protecting the interests of an EU member state, Denmark, and ensuring stability in our own backyard.
It certainly underscores why the U.S. attempts, even if rejected, weren't frivolous. They were responding to very real strategic challenges. Let's pivot to the larger NATO spending issue. Merz and other Europeans often acknowledge the need to reach that 2% defense spending target. Is the pressure from the U.S., often framed crudely, like the Greenland deal was, actually achieving its desired effect of pushing Europe toward greater defense investment?
It's a double-edged sword. The blunt pressure certainly irritates leaders, but it has undeniably forced the discussion and expenditure needle forward. However, the tone often harms the underlying relationship. European leaders feel they are constantly being characterized as free riders, which ignores the vast contributions they make through troop deployments, counterterrorism efforts, and diplomatic backing. Merz's argument is the mature version of the European defense push. We should spend more not because Washington tells us to, but because our own strategic interests demand it.
Right. It's the difference between doing homework because your teacher forced you versus doing it because you understand the need for knowledge.
Exactly. And that's the transformation Europe is attempting to undergo. It's slow, but the realization that security cannot be outsourced is finally cementing.
Let's move to our next section, the why it matters. Elena, if we look past the sensational headline of the attempted purchase, why should our average listener care about the geopolitical positioning of Greenland?
They should care for two core reasons: environment and global balance. Environmentally, Greenland is ground zero for climate change effects. What happens there affects global sea levels. Geopolitically, the race for the Arctic is defining the next few decades of great power competition. If the Arctic becomes destabilized due to unchecked competition among the US, Russia, and China, it affects global security, trade routes, and resource availability for everyone. The Greenland discussion highlighted that the frozen North is rapidly becoming a hot zone of competition, and Europe needs a coherent, unified strategy to manage it. Failure to act means ceding influence to competitors.
That's stark. Now we move to the Q&A section, where I pull a couple of fictional listener questions based on current policy trends. First question. If the U.S. attempts to buy Greenland were purely transactional, are we likely to see similar, perhaps less dramatic, attempts by Washington to purchase or secure long-term leases on other strategically vital, yet vulnerable, territories in Europe or the Pacific?
It's highly probable, yes. The previous administration normalized this highly transactional bilateral approach. While outright purchases are rare and often diplomatically clumsy, we are certainly seeing an increased push for permanent basing access, exclusive resource rights agreements, and heavy economic investment tied specifically to security guarantees. The lesson from Greenland for other nations with crucial strategic assets, say smaller island nations, is that their strategic value is now quantified and will be leveraged aggressively by major powers.
Second question. Merz's political philosophy pushes for a stronger, more autonomous Europe. Could increasing cooperation with Denmark and Greenland itself become a key pillar of future German foreign policy, bypassing direct U.S. influence in the region?
Absolutely. We are already seeing increased German and EU funding toward research, monitoring, and infrastructure in Greenland. By focusing on partnership, climate science, and sustainable development, rather than cold, hard cash for territory, Europe presents a far more appealing model to Copenhagen and Nuuk. If Europe can invest heavily and sustainably, they can strengthen the transatlantic alliance by becoming a more capable, engaged partner, rather than trying to unilaterally push the U.S. out. This is the sophisticated response Merz is hinting at.
Fascinating analysis, Elena. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, moving from a controversial proposal to deep geopolitical strategy. To quickly summarize our takeaways, the attempted Greenland purchase exposed the rift between the U.S. transactional approach and European alliance expectations. It has accelerated the debate within Europe, spearheaded by figures like Friedrich Merz, regarding the necessary increase in defense spending and strategic autonomy. Ultimately, Greenland is not just land, it is the critical nexus point for climate change, resources, and the next great power competition in the Arctic. Elena, thank you so much for shedding light on what is truly one of the most important and often misunderstood geopolitical stories of recent years.
My pleasure, James.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to News for Today. Join us next week when we discuss the implications of AI regulation across the EU. Until then, stay informed.